So, with the last one we talked about a little bit how there's this emphasis and focus on restricting freedom, right? And if we think about prisons to begin with, right, that's more or less what they're trying to do, right? Is that they are about restricting or damaging, limiting, however you want to use it, freedom like that, right? So, because if we think about what's actually the actual process from arrest, right? So if you have a person, you're taken, and you're transitioned, and and now you're in like this car, a little box truck kind of thing, and then you're on your way to the big house, right? Which I think that's maybe my favorite euphemism for prison, right? Is the big house, where you're there with a bunch of you and your closest friends, right? All these other people that are hanging out, inside, right? And the way that we do it, right, is that we're put you in there for years, put in for years. Especially if you are, an inmate who commits a felon. So if you're committing a felon, you're in there, for several years, right? So this is technically the punishment that's reserved for the worst offenders. So these are crimes, that society considers, in theory anyway, like the most despicable. And the key part out of this too is that not only are we restricting your freedom, right, but we also believe in separation. We're separating you from the rest of society, right? Because we've the government or the state has decided that you are not fit to be with other people. And, there's also this sort of belief then too, that if there's this belief that, you're not fit to be with other people, right? We also want you to, acknowledge and think about why that's the case. It's sort of interesting too. Like if we think about how we like separate people, this is something that is sort of like ingrained, whether we know it or not. Where we have like this period of reflection, where we have this period of separating people, having them think about what they've done, and that's true for a lot of different punishments, right? So especially as we moved away from like torture, right? Like, so if we think about like maybe like I'll think about me as a kid. Maybe this is different for you, right? There's definitely an era where I was spanked, right? For sure. That definitely happened. And I was pretty younger, right? And then I get older. Maybe I start asking punk ass questions or something, or maybe my parents learned to err their ways, right? And then, then it became, meaningless labor. And maybe that's sort of like I remember writing sentences a lot or something like that, or interspersed between here too, right? There's also just like more creative stuff like like eating soap, right? Which is not fantastic. Palm olive, F you, I hate you. So so we have like we have to eat soap, right, or stuff like that, right? As we get a little bit older, right? Then we definitely have more like these like conversations, and we definitely had conversations and then isolation as well. where you had to be separate from other people or you couldn't go out and do things, right? And it's interesting is like how people get older, right? We're more mature and we realize like, maybe these BS punishments that we had before, like the person ages, right? But the way that we treat them and restrict them also changes, right? So when we have prisons, right, there's a couple, different philosophies, right? If we think about what actually happens inside a prison or why we actually do it, right? We almost always focus on the fact that we have to have this isolation from other people, that we're sort of like a disease, perhaps, or a danger to others. And of course, if we do offend against other people, perhaps, more often than not, the stuff that we get in prison for harms other people, right? Now, there's a history of, maybe we were in prison for, using drugs, for example, right? Or, maybe like having sex with a prostitute, for an example. And, maybe these are so-called victimless crimes. But more often than not, like when we go to prison, for an extended period of time, for a year plus, right? We're really in there because of harms that we've committed against other people, right? So we are in some ways a disease or a danger, right? And so what do we do at this time, right? So we know we have to be separated, but the thing is, right, more often than not, when we want to punish someone, we want an end goal. Something that is going to be like that we get something out of it, right? So because we want to have a utilitarian kind of purpose, right? So we want an end goal, right? And ideally, right, we don't want to keep people forever. One, there's this question about like, how long are we supposed to keep people? Is like adding 1 year really going to, achieve something different? Like, is there a net benefit to doing it versus over the net harm and stuff like that, right? So we don't want to keep them forever, right? But we do want them to change. We want them to change and never offend again, see the error of their ways. And so on, right? I think like as a quick aside, right, is that if this is like the goal of punishment, then something like that again, never want them again, right? Maybe this is like a Western thing, or maybe it's an American thing, or maybe it's just a white American thing. I don't really know, right? But we had this idea of like a redemption script. Or, where we want to give people second chances, right? We want to believe that people see the error of their ways. So we want them to reflect on it. People see the error of their ways, and then they reflect, and they change, delta. They change for the better, right? So we see them, and they come out of prison, and they're a new person. That's ideally like what we want, right? And we sort of believe that for a lot of different aspects of society, right? We don't do it just for inmates or offenders, right? But we do it for, like maybe there's like for partner selection, right? Maybe like some people stay in bad relationships, right? Because, maybe their partner's cheating on them. And maybe one time is okay, but the second time, I'm going to give you a second chance to prove yourself that you want to be with me or that you want to do right. Like that kind of thing. And so we want we open ourselves up to being vulnerable, and then, we want them to change, right, or something like that. And then if they offend again and harm us, then, then we can justify bringing down the hammer, right? And maybe that's what it is too, right? We believe in this, right, because we want to justify bringing down the hammer. If you offend again. Which is kind of interesting, right? Why do we have this, part of our society then, right, where we want people to lose? So they've seen the error of their ways and they do this again. And we'll kind of pick up as to maybe one reason why that's the case in the next video.